This week, we tackle one of the most influential animes to ever hit Western audiences.
And I continue to ask the question, is Radical Ed a girl?
Hi, I'm Kyle.
And I'm Garrett.
And we watch anime. This show is the quest of one anime superfan's attempts to get his best friend into his favorite medium. Today we were talking about the legendary anime, and that for most people, including myself, allowed anime to be less about cat ears, oversized swords, and ridiculously colored hair, and it saw it as a true art form. So today we're going to be talking about Cowboy Bebop.
Indeed.
But first, what is this podcast all about? Now, the first thing to note is that Garrett and I have been friends for at least 2 decades. Am I right, Garrett?
About 20 years, going on back to 7th, 8th grade, something like that, when we were in a middle school musical together. Good times.
Yes. And this anime actually came out probably around the same time that we started to know each other. So this anime is about as old as our relationship.
At the time, I knew you watched anime. I knew you watched it through high school. I knew you watched it through college and so on and so forth. It was never really my thing. And this sort of circulated. I heard about this at the time when it was on Cartoon Network or whatever it was on, but I just never dove in for one reason or another.
Right. So we were talking about doing a podcast in which, I was going to try to reintroduce you to the idea of the medium, but maybe we can do it in a way that other people can jump in along with you, kind of like a book club for newbies, and you're kind of representing their voice.
Absolutely, because I mean, it can be intimidating because first of all, there's the hurdle of possibly being in a foreign language.
Yes.
There's culturally, it's just not something that a lot of people are used to, whereas animation, at least from what I understand, is far more part of mainstream entertainment in Asia and Japan, whereas not so much in the United States. So I think it might be fun for people to tag along.
Yeah, and I think for my part, as a person who really loves this medium, I also find that the fandom itself can be a real limiter, people getting into this, I think. People have a lot of passion about it. And what this podcast is going to end up being is a kind of how-to conversation on how to get someone who doesn't like something or doesn't know as much about something into what you like without, for lack of a better term, ejaculating your fandom onto them. I know that's a little bit of a weird word to use, but I don't think of anything better that I can come up with.
Right. Well, I think everybody has that thing that they're into. You could be into football, you could be into anime, you could be into a certain band.
You recently got me into Harry Potter.
Yeah, absolutely. Kyle has never read, he's in his mid-30s, he's never read any of the Harry Potter books.
Never.
Enough peer pressure from his wife and his friends.
All of my friends, really.
But the key is we're excited for him, just as Kyle's excited for me to get into anime. But you can't jump down someone's throat about it. And that could be positive or it could be negative.
Right.
But you just try not to do it because it puts up a wall. And
So using a term that we can, like using a medium that we might know, it's kind of like Game of Thrones. You ask someone what they think about Game of Thrones and they're like, oh, there's the Lannisters and they're this and they're that. And then like the person's going, wait, are there dragons? There are elves in this? And then you're like, oh no, that's Lord of the Rings. How dare you? And then you get like mad because the worst thing that can happen in any of these situations is that someone doesn't like something that you told them that they would like. So once again, this is going to be a primer on how to not do that. And we're going to do this in the most easy way possible. And I'll try to explain things as they go along without being too much of a rube about it. But just to kind of give you a backdrop.
Right.
Sorry, go ahead, Garrett.
It's not a competition to be the king of Geek Mountain.
Right, exactly. And so for me, I want to back up for a second, just talk about the name of the show, Weeb and Noob Watch Anime Podcast. And I think it's important to know what a weeb is. So Garrett might not even know why I threw that word out there as the title of the show, but a weeb is an Americanized version of like what an otaku is, which is basically someone who is very into anime. But I think of myself a little differently. I think of myself as a Japanophile. And what that means is I love the culture. I love anime. I love manga. I love all the things that come with it. But I also keep it at a distance. Like a weeb to me is someone who sees the anime and manga as representing Japan as an entirety. Right? So they might go to Japan thinking that all the girls are going to be all weird and curious and goofy and trip over themselves. And like all the guys are going to be all cool and steady. And the high school's the same way all over the place. But
Yes.
honestly, it's like thinking, any of our Marvel comics are the same as United States culture. It just isn't.
I honestly thought, I was like, weeb, that sounds like dweeb, but without the D. But is that
Right.
really shortening the word?
Yeah,
and so
it's
I was
short
like,
for
okay, he'll explain it to me.
Yeah, it's short for weeaboo. So while I don't consider myself a weeb, I consider myself more of a Japanophile because I love all of the entirety of Japan, but I understand it from a distance and I recognize what it is and what it isn't, right? As opposed to someone who might paint their idea of Japan through the idea of anime. So, but that aside, let's get into the idea of Cowboy Bebop. So just to get a primer for people who maybe have not watched this anime, it was created in 1997 and 1998, and it, like Garrett, I got into it probably around the same time that we met on Adult Swim. It was something that got pushed on the late night. So after all the Family Guys and the and different like American cartoons ended like at 2 or 3 in the morning, that's when Cowboy Bebop was on. And for me, I had trouble sleeping.
I have memories of like watching South Park and seeing advertisements like, tonight, this really random show that you've never heard of. And I'm like, oh, Cowboy Bebop, okay. And it's just...
Yeah, and the title's also weird, too, because, like, it comes in that weird format where someone's trying to explain, like, you're going to watch Family Guy, you're watching The Simpsons, I understand what it is. Now this block of shows is Cowboy Bebop, Outlaw Star, and, these things you're like, I have no idea what any of that is, and it's really late in the morning, so I'm not going to watch it. So, luckily for us, now in our late 30s, mid-30s, we can watch these things at our leisure, and we don't have to do it as much.
Right,
right. So... I know what this anime was about long before you started watching it, but to your understanding, Garrett, what is Cowboy? If you were to explain it to someone who has never watched it before, what is it?
To tap into the vein of another sort of niche show that did not probably have the same long-term appeal, it is like Firefly.
Oh man, I was hoping you were going to use that reference.
Yeah, it's like watching Firefly. So it is a Western in space with a little bit of the Jazz Age mixed in. And of course, heavy dramatization and over-emotionalizing of a lot of things. But it was definitely very similar to Firefly. So if you dig Nathan Fillion, cruising around...
You'll like Spike.
Completing missions, you'll dig Spike, who's the lead character in Cowboy Bebop.
Yeah, and that's really all it is. It's kind of like it's that kind of quintessential story of the friendship journey where you meet your kind of friends along the way. And that's a common trope within anime, is the idea that like there's all these different people with different things that they have to get done or different motivations for why they do things. But then they kind of all meet together under these weird circumstances on the ship, and they end up doing them at the same time. And
by the way, sometimes that's really great. But then other times, because you and I have watched a couple shows together, someone will come along and they'll be in an episode, and you start to realize they are really annoying, and all of a sudden you're like, oh no, this isn't a one-off cameo. This person's a permanent crew member.
Yes, and that's another thing we talked about before we started the show, is that like if you do watch Firefly, you might get this reference, but Radical Ed is the Summer of this show. That she's the Deus Ex Machina, that like if something goes wrong, she's there to like fix the problem of the story by making it seem she's got magical hacker powers to make things better.
Right, tied up in a nice little bow with a little explanation behind it, and the episode gets to end like that.
And what's great about this versus something like Firefly, and I promise for those who haven't watched Firefly, we won't go too much into it anymore, but this show you can pick up at any point of the show, and it's okay that you might not know what happened prior. Like, a lot of the show is Spike stumbling through random situations more than anything, and I think that's what makes it work for someone who may have watched it like I did on Adult Swim. Like some nights I couldn't watch it at 2 in the morning, and I had to pick it up at a random episode, and I didn't feel like I was missing something. Like there wasn't a lot, save for the relationship with him and Vicious. Like other than that, you didn't need to really. You could pick it up at episode 4 and work.
I will say, I believe there's 26 episodes of the series.
26.
I'm 14 in at the moment. And I agree with you for the most part, but I will say that around episode 12, episode 13, the main thread of the storyline starts and continues. So, yes, the first half of the series, you could probably pick it up, put it down, not care about it. But I have the feeling as I'm going into the second half of it that it's going to be more important than ever to know who everybody is and sort of what's going on.
Right. And I think the one thing that you also brought up to me when we were talking about this show a long time ago was that you started to see that it was getting more into philosophy and like the nature of man. And it wasn't doing that as much in the beginning. Before it was like Spike jumping over cars and shooting people and like, running away from bad guys. And it starts to get a little bit more philosophizing. And my favorite episode, which I hope you watch, is episode 23, where they go after a cult leader. I think is my favorite episode because it really touches the idea of like humanity, what it means to be a person, and it left me in a really good place. But you haven't watched yet, so I'll leave it there. Yeah. So it's a great episode it's a great show for those who want to jump into. Yeah. Right. So so definitely watch 23 as you go forward. So Garrett and I are now in a good place. Normally Garrett's going to jump cold into these things with 1 to 3 episodes, so it's good that Garrett has a little bit more knowledge of this show, so we'll go around. So besides what it's about, for someone who doesn't necessarily really love the medium like I do, doesn't necessarily love everything that is Japan and can pick out all the little morsels of other animes that they've watched in the past, what is it that you liked about it?
I would argue, and I've watched several anime, not a ton, several, but this is the first sort of deep dive into it and having discussion afterwards. I think Cowboy Bebop is, if you were going to say to someone who's never watched anime, and you're like, you should really watch anime, it's a pretty cool medium, and they're sort of on the edge about it, it's at its heart, it's an action-adventure show with a little bit of romance, a little bit of smarmy comedy. Yeah. It's just like anything else, but instead of people acting, someone put pen to paper and drew it out and then animated it. Mm-hmm. And I think it's probably the most accessible in terms of storyline. Yes, it does get a little heavy-handed as you go later on, but at least at the start, everything from the intro. So Kyle and I absolutely love the intro. It's like this.
Oh man, it's so good.
Jazz just sort of gets you going. I was saying, kind of reminded me, for those out there who are big fans of Archer, sort of that 1960s cocktail bar. There's someone with a stand-up bass and a piano in the corner, and it just sort of gets you grooving and gets you vibing. And from the very start, you will never confuse it for a kid's show. Right. Even for those who want to throw away animation as kids' entertainment, I don't think you'd ever.
No, definitely not. You wouldn't think this to be legal.
If you did that, your mind is not open enough in the first place to even give it a chance.
Right, and it also avoids a lot of the tropes that do annoy people. There weren't any of those, the teardrops that come out of the eye, and someone doesn't make a gag and someone goes, "Arr!" It doesn't do those kind of normal Japanese tropes that you see in other anime. It stays true to the realism of what a person would react, how they would move, how they would respond. They don't shoot in the sky like Team Rocket and then all of a sudden you see a ding and they're fine the next day.
If people are used to the high, or they have this idea of this highly stylized, when they're sad, their eyes get really big and it focuses in on them. It doesn't do any of that. These are people. Actually, they're more than people. They are bounty hunters in space, which, getting back to the theme of the show, when you asked me what it was like, it's like Firefly, and like Firefly, the legality of what they do is sort of suspect at times. Now, in the world in which they exist, bounty hunting is acceptable, much as it is now in America, and they're traveling all over the universe to collect their bounties and to get criminals. But I gotta say, sometimes along the way, the methods in which they do it certainly make me question the legality of what they're doing.
My favorite thing about it is not only is it legal, but they have a TV show that has a woman with nothing on but a very tiny denim jacket and whole lot of under and side boob going "Howdy y'all, I see y'all, you want to talk about this banner?" So much is legalized that they've actually sexualized the idea of it.
Right.
And but
it's not Unsolved Mysteries, but it's like John Walsh on America's Most Wanted, except a very sexy America's Most Wanted, telling everyone how many woolongs to catch this particular bad guy this week.
Which is another interesting thing to me, I think, when I was watching this, is that, rewatching it, the same things that really annoyed me about Firefly kind of annoyed me about this one, too, is that, they don't actually make any money for the first 5 episodes. That just, annoys me. They had this, I can't imagine what the gas bill for a ship this big must be, and they always lost their bounties.
I always wonder about shows that happen in space, because, in particular, when you watch a show like Star Trek, recently my wife and I watch Next Generation from start to finish, which if no one has, you owe it to yourself to do it. They were about 30 years ahead of their time on social issues.
Right.
But I always ask myself, you have these monstrous ships in space, and how does one afford this, whether it's a government or not a government?
Yeah.
And they sort of explain it away in Star Trek by saying, like, oh, the future, it's not really about money. It's more about, like, you know, the social aspect of it, and it's less capitalist the way that we see the world now. But I'm happy to see, at least in Cowboy Bebop, that even though they don't make money the first few episodes, there is a way for them to pay for the things that they're doing, hypothetically.
Right. So I think that's a good point. And I think to kind of bridge the idea of the theme of the show versus like what we like about it and all that thing, I think it is important to talk about the music, because you watch a lot of the show is dictated by the soundtrack behind it. So like in the beginning, you hear that great song by the Seatbelts with Yoko Kanno being the composer of the piece, which is like gets going. It's got that bongo going on, and it's ready to go. It's got all those like strikes by the sax and all the trombones going off, and then like it'll be okay to just stop, watch Spike with a single cigarette with just that single, like saxophone solo playing. So you're very much following along with the show based on the timbre of the music, and so many of the episodes actually are themed after the idea of what the music is like.
And now we interrupt this podcast to bring you Garrett trying to read katakana, Cowboy Bebop Titles Edition.
Gateway Shafuro, Honky Tonku Women, Asteroido Burusu.
Okay. One that I point out to is the episode Heavy Metal Queen, in which the big burly VT is the trucker that's trying to help, hates bounty hunters, but then ends up doing bounty hunting at the end of the show, and then like loves heavy metal. It's like the thing that makes her relax, but like you realize that a lot of the character in the show has to do with the music that goes in. And I don't know if you pick that up as well, but on my second watch through, that's what
the whole time I remember thinking, well, first of all, when you meet this character, they're sort of vague about what gender.
Yeah. What gender VT is.
Yeah, vendor. Oh, is that what VT is?
Yeah. VT's
thanks for
a VT or whatever. I think VT is. I think they clearly say she's a woman at some point.
Yeah, but towards the end when they're like, "Oh, that was my husband," or something.
Yeah. Which was very. I think, and that goes with the name thing too. And of course, Spike knows everybody, so he's like, "Oh, I knew your husband not that long ago."
Right.
Able to guess the name and like.
Yeah. And so the way that the anime paints it is, it's sort of like this. You always get this feeling that they're taking their idea of what the coolest American would be.
Right. Which I think is a good point. I want to see what you think about this. A lot of anime has to do a lot of guesswork on what is cool in the West.
Mm-hmm.
Do you think, for what they were trying to do with this show, for someone who has consumed a whole lot of Western media, did it trigger for you that like they got it? Like this is what an American audience would like, with this understanding of what a Western person would think is cool?
I mean, I got what they were targeting. They got the general outline of it. It wasn't silly in any way, but you saw what they were going for, and I think they achieved their goal, especially if their goal was to appeal to a Western audience. But it's always sort of been like that. In Japan, are they ahead in what's cool, or are they behind in what's cool? And for much of, the 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s, everything was cool in America first, and then it kind of trickled down from there. So it seems like the person who wrote the show, who designed the show, grew up admiring American media.
And specifically like Beatnik generation media, that kind of like...
Yeah, but digging like Westerns. Yeah. Like, I wouldn't be surprised if the person who wrote the show was a big John Wayne fan.
Right.
And at the same time watched gangster films that, James Cagney was in, and sort of put that all together and put it into space.
Right. Yeah, and I think that's a good point, is like... I jokingly, I think about it like a lot of times the episode of How I Met Your Mother where they found out Robin was like a teen pop star, and they're like, "But wait, this was in the '90s, right?" She goes, The 80s didn't jump into Canada until 1993. That's what I kind of feel like this was. It was like the 1960s beatnik culture didn't arrive in Japan until 1998. So it's kind of like one of those kind of ideas. So, I mean, and I think that's what's really awesome about it. Like, it never gets so high and so low that you kind of lose the pacing of it. I think that's what I appreciate about that kind of stuff. But I think for me, what I want to talk about more than anything is the influence it had on anime in general. Okay. Now, I think if I'm to think about the history of fandom, about people who liked anime, there was the secret cabals who had through like VHS tapes find Speed Racer and Voltron tapes, and like they couldn't even get dubs. They had to like find it on some sort of like someone had to mail them the translations, and they had to figure it out on their own. To later, when you get the Dragon Ball Z's of the world, until we got to later in the 90s, when you start getting the big three, the Narutos, the One Pieces, and the Bleaches of the world, Cowboy Bebop existed in this space in which there was a concerted effort to be good in the United States, and the United States saw that and made it available in whatever format was possible. They could only do it in these very niche areas. Like, it had to be on Cartoon Network specifically at the latest time. And if it wasn't for Adult Swim, I don't think anybody would have seen this one.
Right. Well, I mean, there is definitely, and there's also stylized violence.
Right, exactly.
I'm sure they were aiming for a more adult viewer to start.
Right. And I think what's really important as well about the influence about this is that for many, especially people our age, maybe even a little younger or older, this is probably the first one that ever got them to really get it, like get what the medium was all about. I was thinking about this here, like what would be a good way of thinking about it. It's and we may have to parcel my metaphor, but this show is the Bret the Hitman Hart of anime. All right, and I want that to sit with you for a second. I want the viewer to think about that for a second.
The best there is, the best there was, and the best there ever will be.
Yes, I think this anime sharpshootered my heart into submission. No, basically what happened when I think about this show is, before there was the kitschiness, the Hulk Hogan's, the Macho Man, Randy Savage brothers, it was almost cartoony and outlandish, and you kind of had it at arm's length because you understood what it was, but you couldn't really like understand it as real, or didn't really think it anything more as this like ephemeral thing, kind of like most cartoons would be.
Right.
Cowboy Bebop was like Bret the Hitman Hart.
Who took himself entirely too seriously.
Took it but so seriously that you believed it was real.
Right.
Like, why? So that you said, like, this man actually might hurt this person. Like, he was so technical, so on the nose, had no, like, the humor was so, like, subdued that it made you believe a little bit. And I think that's what I appreciate about that.
For those watching, you don't have to get into wrestling to probably know who Bret the Hitman Hart is. He was one of the biggest stars of the 90s. But ultimately, wrestling was a part of his soul, and he took it that seriously, and he wanted to elevate the medium to that level. And so I could see that with Cowboy Bebop. It wasn't willing to be a joke. It wanted to step it up to the next level.
And so for someone who liked it but also saw it as kind of being a little kitschy, like if I was to watch Dragon Ball Z, the idea of these men blurredly shooting palms at each other is like, okay, that's a cartoon, right? Like, I'm watching a cartoon.
Yes, that is for children, and that's a cartoon.
That's a cartoon. I can like this. I can experience this. I can enjoy this. But Cowboy Bebop, there wasn't anything accentuated. Right? People's eyes would get huge. They didn't do anything in these huge mannerisms. So you started to believe that you could see this being a realistic, and you can kind of feel like you could be Spike at some point. Or like, not even that, but it humanized this medium to the point that people believed in it a little bit more. And I think that's what it did for me. That and the show Cowboy Bebop, and Outlaw Star did that for me, because it allowed it to sit in a serious space, and then it didn't end with them all eating ice cream cones and onigiri going, oh, this is so great, and then the sun shines and everything ends. It could end with, and the person died, the end, and then go on to the next episode, and you can just have to move on from that sad realization. Right. So I thought that, to me, made it real to me. And so for me, I feel like for a lot of anime fans, that was the influence that it had on
well, and also think about your age at the time. We're talking 1998 it first aired in the US in 2001.
Yeah.
It first came to the US in 2001, so we're 16 years old.
Yeah.
And everyone's always, through the history of pop culture, you're looking to be the first to like something that's cool that other people haven't found out about yet. And I can totally see when this came along, being 16 at that same time as well, it didn't hit me then because I didn't watch it, but I can totally see how it opened up the floodgates for people to say, this is cool, and sharing it with their friends instead of a closet anime fan, because you're like, well, it's kind of hokey at times.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think that's important. Like, so we're talking about it now 20 years later, and I don't think it like the graphics or the topic or the wording, I don't think anything expired. Like, I don't think anything...
This could come out now.
This could come out now, and it would still be cool. And
maybe the graphics wouldn't be, like, sharp, but people would just assume that it was being intentionally gritty because of the storylines being so gritty at times.
Yeah, if you told me this thing came out in 2019, and you show me that, I'd be like, oh, yeah, someone clearly put a filter on it to make it look nice and grainy, like an old VHS tape, and I would have believed you because it still has some relevance to it. So... Yeah. That, to me, one thing was really important. But one thing I wanted to talk to you about, and this is something that I know anybody who watches this or listens to this online is going to be mad at me for, is not telling you beforehand that this is the only instance in which the dub isn't an acceptable way to watch this.
So just to give people a quick explanation, something Kyle has told me maybe a dozen times throughout our 20 years of friendship, there are two ways to watch anime. There is dub and there is sub. So dub is when it comes to America, they use American voices and they overlay it over the animation so that you have an American voice. Often it's cartoonish and silly. And the alternative is to listen to it in Japanese, which you have no idea what they're saying, but you watch the subtitles. And if he said it once, he said it 20 times. Kyle says, when in doubt, choose sub over dub every time. But as you're explaining to us, this is the one exception.
This is the one exception. And I think the one thing to note about this one is that it's actually famous for its use of the dub. And I'm trying to remember the... American voice actor. I'm going to quickly do a little Google search about for this thing, so that I can say his name, because people are going to be mad at me because I'm a weeb, but I forget his name. Steve Bloom is his name, and he is a famous voice actor all throughout anime.
The voice of Spike?
He's the voice of Spike, and he hit it so on the head that, like, velvety, like, cool, like you could tell he'd been smoking for a decade or two, and it actually could get that cool. Usually Americans get so rushed with the idea of how the lips are moving that they like go, hey, I'm going to do this, and they'll kind of end up sounding like Mickey Mouse at some point. He took his time and he made Spike sound so rad that, like,
because the lips ultimately. It's not a Latin-based language. I mean, the lips are never truly going to match.
No, never. And not even Japanese isn't going to do that either.
Make it sound as good as you can.
Yeah, exactly. And this was at a time in which animation was expensive. So to make the lips... Like, now everything's done through CGI and through computers, so you're going to get better lip movements from modern Japanese anime. But this was in the 90s, and that wasn't going to happen. And so even in Japanese, you weren't going to be able to do all the little intricate staccato that comes with the Japanese language. So... I think this was something. Did you get a chance to watch the anime at all in the dub version of it? Or
no, I've not. So right now, like I said, 26 episodes. I'm like 14 in, and I've done them all sub. And I am going to revisit them and do like 3 or 4 in the dub, just so that I get a feel for it. Because I imagine as we go forward, we hang out and we talk about different anime, I will not be checking out the dub, so it'll be my one chance to hop into it.
Yeah, and I think the important thing about the subs versus dubs argument, and I know we're probably going to start some real conversation in the chat, because this is an actual real debate within the fandom, is like, is it acceptable to listen to dub versions of things? And I get it. If you don't like reading what you're watching, I get it. Like, that's can be kind of frustrating, but you miss a lot when it goes in the dub, because a lot of times the jokes or the way people talk, like a lot of times in the Japanese language, they try to emphasize a person's character by suffixes they use. So like someone might say something and have a little tagline afterwards, and that kind of adds to their character and how they work. You don't get that in English, and they're going to like add things like the famous thing that Naruto is that he says "databeo," which means like, I guess it kind of can be translated to believe that. And but then you get to the English dub, and it's like every 3 seconds the person's going, believe it, believe it, believe it, believe it, believe it. And it annoys people to no end, but it's important. It's an important thing because it's part of Naruto's character that he's like, it kind of makes him seem childish and hyperactive. And how do you do that in English when the Japanese makes it so that he always ends his sentence with his date bayo, and he's now saying it really stupidly in English. So I can get both sides of the argument that like it also might just be an ease of access, but when in doubt, do subs versus dubs. For those who are jumping in for the first time, definitely recommend watching it for dubs as well. So
and I don't know if this is becoming more like socially acceptable, but back in high school, one of our dear friends always watched things with subs on it, even English speaking. Yeah. And I remember thinking to myself, this is absolutely insane. Why am I watching subtitles on this? But I'd say over the past 10 years, I watch everything with subtitles on. There's often when people make a movie and they're going for something highly stylized and it's incredibly quiet, I have great hearing, and I find myself saying, what the hell did they just say?
Especially anything with Tom Hardy in it. Like, anything with Tom Hardy, that man mumbles so much. Yeah.
Batman.
And it's so bad that even when he does anything that even in his natural accent, he mumbles so much that I can't understand. So for me, I don't mind reading what I'm watching because I do it all the time with anything else I'm watching. Yeah. So
right.
Yeah. So ultimately, I think what I can say about this is that for many that are going to watch this for the first time, go into it with a sense of it's going to be a different experience than what you've probably experienced before, right? It's not going to be anything you may have seen in the other animes that you watched before. It's going to have a little bit of weird graininess to it. It's going to be a little dated, but at the same time, it's worth watching. Do you think it's worth watching before we get into our final scores?
Right. And for those who are wondering if there is an attractive female animated character because it's Japanese animation, there absolutely is. The crew of the ship starts off with two characters. It starts off with Spike, who we've talked about extensively. He's sort of the rogue, handsome, suave fellow. There's the pilot, Jet, who's sort of the straight man to his, if you're anything about like...
Former cop to like the Murtaugh to his Briggs.
Yes, the Murtaugh to his Riggs. Absolutely.
I'm too old for this, you know.
You're too old for this. Absolutely. And then the next character that they pick up along the way is Faye Valentine, who is by animation standards incredibly attractive, and we spend far more time staring at her breasts than we absolutely should in an animated show. And then there's...
It also introduces to the idea of boob physics with her. Like, her breasts will jiggle with the slightest movement. Like, the wind blows 1 mile an hour, her boobs are jiggling. Like,
and I know that it's supposed to be sensual, but it becomes comical.
Yeah.
What the hell are they doing?
Just going like, harumph, and then like they're just like... And I think that's the important thing to know. Garrett, one of my goals, and I will promise this to all of our fans, I'm going to make Garrett watch the weirdest, etchiest things you've ever seen in your entire life, Garrett. And I know that like people are going to end up watching the show are going to just do this with their hands because they can realize that like if you thought Faye Valentine was ridiculous with her sexuality in this, as predicted in the show, you have seen nothing yet. I guarantee you that.
Right. And I've read some fairly absurd manga before, but there's a difference, I think, between seeing it on screen in motion versus something in a comic strip, you know?
Yeah.
And then the last character that comes along, and the one that has honestly sort of been, I look forward to hearing anyone else's opinions on this, but has sort of been a thorn in my side, is a character named Radical Edward. Again, they're sort of... I think it becomes fairly clear that it's a girl, but you certainly see the character drawn as being a boy child.
With a name like Edward, not like it's like Edelina or something like that.
Right. And he becomes she becomes the Deus Ex Machina, where it ties up storylines really easy. But the thing that also really got me about the character is episodes 1, episodes 2, episodes 3, I'm starting to really vibe on this show, and I'm not saying to myself, I have to watch this because Kyle assigned it to me this week. I'm saying I want to watch it because I'm like, oh my god, this is like really interesting. I want to get into it, and it's so cool, you know. It's like really cool. And then they introduce this character, and I don't know how it works. This is very early on for me, but I felt like there was a bunch of suits sitting around in a Japanese boardroom, and they're like, okay, we need to make sure there's a character that kids can relate to.
Yeah.
Because kids spend money, and money is what we want. So let's get a character that no matter what's going on in the show will do something ridiculous, and kids will go, ha, 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 I love Radical Edward, ha, 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 ha. And that's exactly what they did, and it makes me want to walk out of the room.
So yeah, that's one thing I'm going to ask people to comment in the comment section below. Were you bothered by Ed as much as Garrett was? Because I think that to me is a good question. Because another
Were you bothered by Ed? Were you?
Here's the thing, and I went back and watched the dub as well on this, and Edward is annoying in both. Like, it's like I don't know. I think it's not so much what Edward says or what Edward does. It's just all the in between noises doing like that. Like,
and also the fact that like they paint Edward as like a
genius,
right? But an idiot savant.
Yeah.
Like, oh, what are you guys talking about? Oh, I know the answer that solves everything off the top of my head, and you're like, shut up, Edward. Where were you 20 minutes ago? Could have avoided this whole episode.
And I love another MacGuffin that gets thrown out in the middle of the show is when they introduce Faye Valentine. They introduce that she might be this being that's like over 800 years old, so that like if you're like an old man creeping on a younger woman, it's okay because she's like 800 years old.
I did not catch that.
I know. I don't think they brought it up later because it's a total MacGuffin, but like it's one of those things that like
it's okay to lust after this.
Exactly. They do this a lot. This is another thing you're going to learn in anime is that like if they have a character that's and then one episode
young girl.
We're going to dedicate an episode to Lolicon and what that means, and you're going to hate me for it. But before that, I'm going to say that they do a lot of this thing where like the character is very cherubic and young and like cutesy. And they make that character like an ancient being that's like 500 to 1,000 years old, and so it's okay to kind of sexualize.
Nobody feels like
that little fairy's been around the block, that kind of shit. So I think it's one of those things that you're gonna have to like get. And we're gonna so to close out this thing, what we do in every episode is we're gonna give a weeb score and we're gonna give a noob score. Now, what the weeb score means is if you've been watching this for a long time, how influential is this thing? How does this represent the medium? How does this anime reflect well on the medium of anime? And then we're going to do the noob score, which is if you've never watched this kind of stuff before, how digestible is it? How easy is it to watch? Who would you recommend it based on what you've seen so far? So for me, I would give this a weeb score of 9. And why I wouldn't give it a 10 out of 10 is because it's a little outdated now at this point. The animation's a little off right now, and I will say that it does get up its butt a little bit by the end of the show. But I still think that it's something that represents the medium well. It doesn't over exaggerate the things that people make fun of it for. And it is a little kitschy with Faye Valentine's boob physics and how annoying Radical Ed is, but I don't think it detracts from how good the story writing is and how non-episodic it is and how digestible it is. So I give it a 9.
Okay.
So your noob score.
As a noob, coming to it, obviously I am, 35-year-old male. I have my own things that I've grown up liking and enjoying, my own biases that I have. But I think this is probably, once you hit 13, 14 years old, someone who could sort of understand a little bit more of the heavy content that they get into later on. I think it might be the perfect starter, unless you know that person doesn't like mysteries and suspense and action.
Thrillers are not their thing.
That's not their vibe, then maybe this isn't their path. But I would also give it a 9, and I'm taking away a point for Edward. Boo.
So that you give it an Ed subtraction is what you're saying.
I just think that it was lip service to like, what is this show missing so that we can appeal to every audience? And the character annoys me, and it doesn't ruin the show for me.
Right.
But I'm not going to give any spoilers. I'm 13 episodes in, and there have been at least 3 episodes where Edward's explain away at the end, I'm just like, garbage. But that being said, it's a 9. Check it out. If you've never watched anime, you'll love it. If you've seen it, You love it.
Yeah.
And if you like anime but you haven't seen it, you can appreciate it for what it is. And I would say that it's a huge part of history, certainly in the West and in probably America's first real step towards appreciating anime and having it be a legitimate, popular pop culture item here.
Right. And so I think for me, it's important to note that it's still available to watch. It's not one of those things that you have to go in the middle of the web to look for. You can find it on Hulu. That's how I watched it again.
Yeah, I'm watching it on Hulu, and even though I pay an exorbitant amount of money for Hulu Live, and I can say that because they're not a sponsor or anything.
Not a sponsor. That's anything. Anytime a product's placed, we're new YouTubers, so we have to say not a sponsor.
But the commercials are actually quite limited in it, probably because it's an older property.
Yeah,
it's not like to watch like New Girl or Friends where they can have a commercial every 3 minutes.
Yeah.
So it was quite tolerable, and it was a lot of fun. I would suggest anyone to check it out if they're curious.
I would say this thing was as easy as a drag from a smooth cigarette that Spike blows in the middle of a space jazz hall. So Go for it, anybody. Go forth and Excelsior. Watch this thing. Get into it. I highly recommend it. So that is going to be how we end the Weeb and Noob Watch Anime podcast. Remember, we're going to be on Podbean as well as on our YouTube channel, so make sure you subscribe below. But also, we want to start this conversation. What did you think about Cowboy Bebop? What did you think we missed from the conversation? We want this conversation to keep going, and maybe down the line, if there's enough interest, we'll review it again. So please feel free to do it. But otherwise, we want to thank you for joining us, and have a good night, guys.
See you later, guys. Take care.
So that's all for our first episode. Don't be a bakayero and subscribe to our channel.
Let us know what you think in the comments below. Let me know what anime I should watch next.